welcome. This is Gary Abbott of USA Wrestling, a Moments Off the Mat segment. I've got two good friends and great guests on our show today. We'll start with Sally Roberts with Wrestle Like a Girl, who was not only a world medalist as an athlete, but also has become a true leader in the sport of wrestling through her nonprofit, as well as Coach Terry Steiner, who's been our national women's coach since the beginning of our women's program back, I don't know, how many years now, Coach?
18 years.
18 years. We can't all be that old. No way. Not possible. But Coach Terry Steiner, and our topic's going to be the emerging sports status situation that we were able to do this year for women's wrestling, and then the women's college scene, the past, and obviously what we're really looking forward to is the future. So anyway, Sally, just tell us your thoughts the day that the Division I vote came in, and as a sport, we receive emerging sports status for women's wrestling on all three NCAA divisions. What was that day like for you?
Well, first, it was completely unexpected. The last communication that we had, you, myself, Julia Salata, with the NCAA was to say, hey, keep this legislation tabled if the only intention is to defeat it. But if you guys do want to untable it, we would love that. Just try and give us some heads up. Well, the way that it went down was that there was no advance notice. We didn't know that they were voting on it. I literally got a phone call from Jean Merrill, in my mind, like it was out of the blue, saying, hey, I just wanted to give you a heads up. I'm leaving I just got notification from the Division I Council that women's wrestling, the Division I Council voted and approved women's wrestling for emerging sports status. And my first response was, they untabled it? I mean, that was how much we didn't get the information. So I was completely ecstatic. And my first phone call was to Rich Bender to say, oh my gosh, you won't believe it. Are you sitting down? And he said, I would prefer to stand up with any news this week. And I said, okay, sure. So I gave him the news, and it was a bright, positive spark that we as a sport needed, we as a nation needed. And I just feel like it was all of the things coming together in the most precarious of times that really just uplifted our sport in a very needed and necessary way.
Terry, what were you thinking about this? I mean, obviously, from day one as the national coach, you've wanted to see us develop a college system for our women. And, this was a thumbs up at the highest level of college athletics.
Well, I tended to look back on where we've come, and where we started even before I was here, way back to, the first World Championships. But then, as we start growing, and from way back in the late 80s, early 90s, and where we've come to this point where we were at in 2002 and 2003 when I first got involved with women's wrestling, and then to where we are right now. And I really just thought of all the people that have had an influence on this and making this happen, because I do think it is maybe the most significant step, with the emerging sports status of Division I, II, and III, and the state sanctioning movement that we've had. I mean, it's so significant to, just the overall program of wrestling within the United States. So it just, I was elated to hear the news, and just thought of those who started this movement way back, in the early times.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that day, right? Initially, Sally had been told, hey, you can't tell anyone for a couple of days. And the next thing you know, there's a press release by the NCAA saying women's wrestling is in Division I. So that was kind of a crazy day, because I'd already finished working that day, and we got called in on this, and it's like, okay, this is like a party for me. It's something that we've been thinking about, working on for decades, right? So
I think it was just a bright spot for everyone, because we've had so many just negative times right now during this COVID, and things that have just been turned down and turned away and shut down. And so finally there was something that seemed to be going in the right direction. So I think, for sport in general and for, wrestling in general and USA Wrestling and just everyone involved. I mean, I think it was finally something positive,
Well, and for people like all three of us, we really can look back numerous years and see the path that took us to this point. Obviously, I've been involved in women's wrestling as long as I've known either of you guys, maybe even a little earlier. It makes you think back to where it was and when we first started trying to make this a priority. Sally, people may or may not know that you wrestled in college for a women's program back when we only had a few programs at all, like at the beginning of women's college wrestling. And just what was it like for you when you were a college student and wrestling when the sport was nowhere near developed? And how far do you think it's come since when you had to go out there and try to be a student athlete in a sport that really hadn't been developed yet?
I look back on my short collegiate season, and I say short because once Team USA opened up the Olympic Training Center for residents, I got accepted into that. So I really did 3 years undergraduate at collegiate institutions. In my mind, it was like I was wrestling in the wild, wild west. I mean, yes, we had to make weight and we had to do certain things, but there was no governance structure. It really seemed like things were put together in the best way possible, but there wasn't a good foundation. There wasn't a good structure. There wasn't good mechanisms in place. And really, like, the thing that I saw day in and day out were girls that were electing to not go to college because they couldn't find a collegiate institution that really fit their academic and athletic needs. And so what I see now as I look across this landscape is that we have the NCAA. You can go and wrestle and go to college, and you can find a good academic and athletic fit. We have the junior colleges, we have the NAI. I mean, there's so many more opportunities for girls and women right now with the 28 states that we have sanctioned and the 30,000 girls that are wrestling across the USA. What really gets me so excited is that we have, as a collective, created social, financial, and educational mobility, meaning that these girls and women that have previously been invisible, they now have opportunities to be seen, to be heard, to own their space, their voice, their bodies, and they get to do that using wrestling. And along the way, they're going to be getting degrees, they're going to be getting an education, and when they come out the other side of this lifelong journey of being a wrestler, they're going to be good, productive citizens of society. They're going to be leaders, and that's really what has me so excited about all of this.
Coach Steiner, you wrestled in college under the legendary Dan Gable. You were in a program which was at the absolute top of college athletics. But when you were hired at USA Wrestling and took on the challenge of women's wrestling, you came into a culture where we had college women's wrestling, but it nowhere near matched the kind of experience you had as a Division I NCAA champion, right? Talk about your thoughts initially when you started coaching and why it was important to you to really put focus on building up that college community for our young women.
Well, I knew from the beginning that, when I was hired by USA Wrestling, that they weren't just looking for a coach, right? They were looking for an advocate. They were going to fight the fights and fight the battles to move things forward. And I just remember, at the very beginning where you're fighting everyone, you're fighting everyone just for space on a mat, And at first we were even okay, like being in the back room, right? But we were always shoved in a corner somewhere where really they were doing it because they knew they needed to do it, but not really because they wanted to support it. And now to the point where we have institutions like the NCAA, institutions like, the National Wrestling Coaches Association, the National Hall of Fame, and everyone behind and fighting the same fight. And now we're seeing again the increases at the state sanctioning. I mean, just to see that all of those institutions come behind it and also see the value of the sport, on females as well as males. I mean, I think that's what's exciting. And so, yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason for me getting in this was, that I want these opportunities opened up for women just like they were for me, right? And I had great opportunity in the sport of wrestling, and my job, you know, not only is to coach the elite level teams, but to help open up and get people around me that are helping to open up the opportunities for women at all levels, at the state level and at the college level. So to see this finally come to fruition where this is coming forward is just, it's a great day, right? And we still have a ways to go, right? I mean, it's I think we've seen great strides and great momentum. We just have to keep our, you know, our foot on the gas pedal, so it was continue moving forward, right? And hopefully, you know, we will see the same kind of programs within women's wrestling at the Division I level that we see men's programs.
So I like to think a little bit about one of the other big steps forward for us as a sport. And Sally, you understand this, was in 2002 when the International Olympic Committee added women's wrestling to the Olympic Games. You know, at that time, USA Wrestling had been involved in women's wrestling. We had put together world teams that were successful. We were even funding athletes through the efforts of leaders like Trish Saunders and Art Martori. But at the time they announced the Olympics, you know, that was a huge spike for the ability to sell the sport and grow the sport. But that first Olympic team had a very distinct college background. 4 athletes, you coached them. Sally, you know every one of them, right? Patricia Miranda wrestled for a men's team. Taylor O'Donnell wrestled on a women's team and then came to the training center, right? Sarah McMahon wrestled for both a women's college team and a men's college team when she made an Olympic team. And then Takara Montgomery wrestled on a women's team. So college wrestling was already part of our Olympic family before we were even in that. And that's kind of a crazy remembrance of what it was like even back in 2004, back when Sally was wrestling, right? That college was already part of what we were doing, right, Sal?
Yeah, yeah. And what makes it so crazy was that you go back and let's say Patricia Miranda, who was the start, she ended up breaking into the starting lineup of Stanford. And Patricia is known for her hilarious humor, meaning it's so dry, like she is funny in her own way. And to hear her tell the story of, she was like, yes, I'm actually wrestling in college. And I was like, you gotta wrestle. Who did you wrestle? And she said, Stephen Abbott. And her face, like, no, she was like, I finally got my shot and I ran right into this brick wall. But she was like, you know what? But it's okay because I have my shot and I have my chance. And so with the women that were wrestling in college, like, that was their collegiate wrestling opportunity. You know, you break into the starting lineup and you're pulling someone like Stephen Abbott. And she just would say, you know, I always thought that I was someday going to wrestle like Stephen Abbott and be this beautiful, spectacular display. And then I just realized I'm a fighter and I'm going to wrestle like Terry and it's going to look like I'm wrestling out of Iowa. And I'm okay with that. So then when we actually got the opportunity to come and wrestle at the Olympic Training Center underneath Terry and the rest of the USA national coaching system, I'll tell you what happened. We started to really blossom and shine because we had resources and people cared about us, and we had an opportunity just to do what we did best, which was wrestle. And to be able to take that same experience and now take it to a collegiate system where these girls are going to get opportunities for education and be able to wrestle, and they can sort of build the life, that the dreams that they've always wanted. I mean, this is going to be such a spectacular thing. And I mean, we can go on for quite a bit to be able to say, once we get these coaches slotted and we get these girls and these women at these programs, what's going to be happening to the USA women's wrestling team? I just think on a global scale, we're going to just start to eclipse Japan, because now we have all of these mechanisms in place to be able to provide the opportunities that are going to really level the playing field even more so than we have.
Terry, when you first started, one of your first things was to get the women's college coaches together and meet with them, invite them to training camps, ask the women's college coaches to take teams on tours, involve them at every level of our sport. How was that a good strategy, and what did you learn when you started working with the people that were on campuses helping develop our sport?
Well, I mean, they just had a lion's share of all of the girls, right? I mean, so we only had, like, at the time when we started the resident program in Colorado Springs, we had 22 spots for, that was only 22 of our wrestlers that my focus was on a daily basis. And then everyone else was out and about in these college programs and high school programs and things like that. So I wanted their involvement because it was bringing more of those kids in, being, more of the top kids from the college programs in around our national team, and just trying to spur their development, so we could get more development out of them, and letting iron sharpen iron, so to speak. So I wanted our coaches around. I wanted them to know a language, them to understand what we were trying to do. And I wanted them to understand that they were a part of it, right? We can spend time on 22 people, but that's only going to take us so far. We have to have a development structure that, is constantly building that pipeline of people. And that's what we have now, right? I mean, that's really what we have now, is with, close to 90 college programs and the emerging sports status. I mean, now we truly have a pipeline that is, developing athletes, and to have it in the sport of freestyle wrestling is even more important, right? We don't have that barrier that the men's programs have that is a constant challenge. Now we're, through our college experience of those 4 or 5 years of college, our athletes are developing their freestyle skills, and, it should mean great things for Team USA down the road. And I've said it for a long time, and I truly believe that there will come a day that USA Wrestling and USA is the dominant force in women's wrestling across the globe. And I really believe that because of our infrastructure, because we have sports within our academic settings, right? Within our school systems, from high school through college. And that's really going to set us apart, right? And now that these opportunities are opened up, we've already shown in so many states and so many programs that if you build the opportunity, the athletes will come, and that's what we've done now. And so it should mean great things moving down the road, right?
Yeah, and in a sport, obviously, when you were in college, you wanted to be the national champ, the NCAA champion. And originally in women's college wrestling, there wasn't really much of a national opportunity. You'd go to USA Wrestling events. But then, a bunch of college coaches got together, started a college tournament, and a few years later, they called it the WCWA National, Women's Collegiate Wrestling Association. And for many years, we had national champions in college women's wrestling, and many of them went on to make world and Olympic teams. Obviously, Helen Maroulis won 4 WCWA national titles in college before she went over and won the gold in Rio. So, how important was that? And Sally and Terry, both of you, that even before we got official status, we were crowning national champions.
I think it's important. I think it shows the credibility of our college system, right? And just what it can do. I mean, Helen wasn't that far removed from college when she started winning world and Olympic titles, right? And so you can't win a world and Olympic title in a year or two, right? That takes years and years and years of development. And so our college system, it shows that was a part of her development, right? A part of her true development came, right out, in high school and right out of high school in the college programs. And then, once they get to that national team level, then we're fine tuning things, right? We're taking them from great to elite, but really that a lot of that development comes during those college years. So.
Yeah, I mean, Sally, have you heard from other athletes that did get that opportunity to do 4 or 5 years in college and are excited for what's going on for the new young athletes who even have more opportunity? I mean, How do the women athletes who were part of building this feel about what's going on?
You know, it has been such a joy to be able to deliver this news. I mean, first we had some social media that went out amongst all of the national wrestling entities. And then beyond that, I wanted to make sure that there were certain people that did in fact know. So I got to start making some phone calls, and like to start out with speaking with Trish Saunders and Afsoon to be able to share with them this news. I mean, to hear it in their voice, like Trish Saunders will tell you, and she remembers going to the steps of the Capitol and hearing when the legislation for Title IX got passed, and really like being a child and going through that experience. And then here we are 30 plus years later, 40 years later, and now we have women's wrestling as an emerging sport. And she just said, I always wanted to see this in my lifetime, but it's so hard to fathom that this did happen. And then talk with athletes like Trish, and then you fast forward and you talk to these girls that are juniors and seniors in high school, and they're like, I can't even fathom what it would be like to not have this opportunity, because this is their new reality. And that's exactly it, right? Like we worked hard so that we could make changes so that the pioneers of Afsoon and Marie and Trish Saunders, like they had such a heavy weight and they had such a challenging way forward, and we get to make it better for the next generation, and we want to always be able to do that. But there comes a time when we look at our past and say, you know, we do have a ways to go, but let's look at where we started and how we got here, and these dog fights that we as women and men and athletes and allies had to go through. And you had to take every win, no matter how small, because it was just that hard.
Yeah, wow, it's a story that probably hasn't been told enough, and we're going to work hard to tell it, I'm sure, right? About what those little steps were incrementally to put us in this position. And I recently did a column about emerging sports status and wanted to make sure people knew a little bit about the history of it. That, you know, for a number of years we talked about it, but it took a little bit of nudging from Kira Barry and a few others to get USA Wrestling to step up as a leader and hold some phone calls about, well, we got to get real serious about getting this done with the NCAA. Sally, you were in a lot of those early calls. Terry, you and I were both on those calls. You know, we had to really work our butts off just to check all the little boxes that got us to this point. Do you remember some of those early calls, Sally and Terry, and the things that we had to figure out and learn along the way? It was a journey.
Yeah. So Gary, I remember we just finished the one pager, and I was going to go to the NCAA Diversity and Inclusion Forum, and I was going to start the conversation about women's wrestling, and where like the sport of wrestling is going to be putting together a proposal for women's wrestling to be an emerging sport. I remember I had that one pager. I was at the Diversity and Inclusion Forum, and I had no idea, but I literally walked into a space where on one hand, they wanted to be so supportive, and on the other hand, they wanted to know what my agenda was. Was it truly to help and support the female wrestlers, or was there some other ulterior motive? And so the first year of me going out and doing that work on behalf of our sport was building bridges and making relationships. And I remember so vividly, Amy Wilson, who's the head of the Office of Inclusion, she said, you know, we were always waiting for this proposal to come across our desk, but it had to come from wrestling. It had to come from the sport itself. And we were all waiting for you guys to be able to push this forward. And to hear that gave me such hope, because prior to those conversations, we had to do a lot of work to build some bridges and to mend relationships. And just as a sport, because of perceptions and the way that some of the things in history have occurred. And to be able to come full circle, and then to be able to talk with Amy Wilson and some of those stakeholders that at first weren't thrilled to support wrestling because they weren't sure why we were doing it, and then to realize that yes, it was for the girls. Like, man, that felt so good to me too.
Terry, one of the decisions on those calls, and if, Sally, you're part of this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, USA Wrestling could have run out and just done it and worked with Wrestle Like a Girl, but we decided that we wanted a coalition. more than just the NGB and maybe a nonprofit that had a reason to do this. And we reached out to other groups and we got other people involved. How effective do you think that was, Coach?
Well, I think it was the only way to do it, right? To be all inclusive and to have all parties engaged in the process and even bought into it. I mean, I remember sitting in an executive board meeting with USA Wrestling and listening to Mike Moyer with the National Wrestling Coaches Association and Leroy Smith with the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, and then just talking to them about moving this forward. And I think it was eye-opening for all of us, once we started talking about the different issues and the different things that needed to happen, and how this could not only help with the opportunities for women within the sport of wrestling, but help wrestling in general, right? And strengthen our sport. And that's really our jobs, is to strengthen our sport forever, right? So it can never be put in the position that it was back in 2012, removal from the Olympic Games. But even within our own country, I mean, to strengthen the sport so wrestling programs are secure within college programs, right? And the addition of women to college, athletic departments is a huge bonus for any wrestling program out there. So I think that just seeing that all happen and really seeing the change of attitude, right? I mean, when I first began here back in 2002, I remember when I first took the job, you can't imagine how many calls I had from some of the top coaches out there, basically asking, like, what are you doing? Right? Like they thought it was such the wrong move and the wrong direction for me to take as a young coach. But I guess it was more than that. It was about what's right for humanity, what's right for the entire sport out here to move this forward. And I knew that this was going to take time to make this change and to change the hearts and minds of people. But now to really see it, and now having some of those same coaches coming back and asking more and more and more about how we can get a program started, the things we can do, I mean, is very rewarding. And just to know that it's come that far, right? I'm grateful for having the support of an organization and now having more people just behind it. At first it seemed like everyone was in our face, and now it seems like everyone's behind us fighting the same battle and trying to move everything forward. I mean, it's incredible how really it took a long time and to get going, it seemed like, but now all of a sudden the last few years, it's just snowballed and it's taken a whole different trajectory, and it's just great to see, right? It's just awesome to see.
Now, we may have at the point of our early meetings thought, well, we should be able to knock this emerging sports status thing out pretty quickly, pretty well, pretty good, no problem. And we realized it was a heck of a long process with a ton of work behind it. Sally, remember when we had our first deadline, August 1st, 2017, and we had to get a document, and then there had to be all these support letters, and there had to be budgets, and man, what a fight it was just to make that first step and get that document turned in. I mean, you personally took on a lot of those letters and budgets and things like that. What was that like, man? It's like we knew we had a day that we had to have it organized. And we took it right to the end, didn't we?
You know what I actually found the most interesting through that whole journey was that my collegiate experience was 3 years. I did attend an NCAA school and an NAIA school, but I didn't that was before women's wrestling fell underneath either one of the associations. So essentially, I was having to learn the NCAA system while I was sprinting. So I didn't understand budgets and EADAs and how do you get them and why are people so unwilling to give this information? It doesn't make sense. Well, then I started to learn more about Title IX and all the different prongs and proportionality. And there were some schools that were like, hey, we want to support this, but we also don't want to give you this information, not because it's right or wrong, but because for so long, like information was used against people. And so really like the art of that journey for those letters and the budgets was relationship building and getting to know the coaches and the athletic directors. But then, I mean, it was such a learning process, because one of the things that happened was that once we finally got emerging sports status for Division II and Division III, I got a phone call from an administrator that really wasn't, they were thrilled, but they said, but how did this happen? And I realized that we had been working as a coalition, and there was new programs that were getting added, but we weren't holding them into the mix. And so there was still some people that felt like they got left out. And of course that was unintentional. Like, we were sprinting 1,000 miles an hour and collecting documents and getting the information and growing the sport and doing grassroots development and state sanctioning and the NCAA all at the same time. And so, but it gave us an opportunity, because we could have either said, well, you were a new school that got added and that's that, we're so sorry. Or that gave us an opportunity to circle back around and say, let's make our coalition stronger. Let's make it bigger. We have more seats at the table. Come sit down. And I think that was one of the turning points, at least for me in the whole process, was when I recognized how much easier, and now I sound like Terry, how much easier it is to grow when you have a strong team, everyone working together, instead of being the person that swims upstream and just sort of goes it alone. And because on one hand, I thought, well, this is really cool because there's all this work that needs to be done, and I know how busy everyone else is in this wrestling space, so I'll just take on more of this work. But what I didn't realize I was doing was cutting some people out of the process that really did want to be involved. And so for me to step back and look and see Harry and Gary and Rich and all the administrators, and to be able to build these phenomenal relationships with members of the NCAA Committee for Women's Athletics, and to look at this beautiful project that we were able to accomplish. And the reason that we did it, and we got told this time and time again, was we want to see the sport of wrestling united. We want to see everyone involved in this. And that's exactly what we were able to show and display time and time again, which is we all care about this. This matters to everyone. It's not just the administrators, the coaches, Team USA, wrestling. Like, this is something that we all are so passionate about. And that was what helped us get across the finish line.
Yeah, and clearly, the history of it, obviously the first document we put in was rejected for certain reasons. Maybe they needed additional information, or in my mind, they kept moving the bar and changing it because they kept trying to make emerging sports status a better program. And every time they did that, they asked more from us, right? But we ended up spending a whole year putting the document back together and resubmitting it. And then that next year, gosh, how many conference calls did we have to have with the Committee on Women's Athletics about not only our plan, but the document, and explaining wrestling to them, but also explaining how we think wrestling should work in the college levels. But the big day that I brought tears to my eyes, and a lot of people in our office, was when the Committee on Women's Athletics recommended that we become an emerging sport at all three divisions. Just thoughts about that, because that was like 2.5 years or more in the making, right, Sally?
Yeah. It's not often that it happens, but I also got really emotional. Like, this was 2+ years of daily work, daily tracking schools, tracking rosters, who's the coach, do they need help recruiting, where are these schools at, how can we continue to support? I mean, because you're right, the first proposal got rejected because what they didn't articulate, the Committee for Women's Athletics, within that first NCAA packet that we submitted, was that there had to be a minimum roster, and there had to be different, not only just a minimum roster, but they had to have 6 different athletes at 6 different weight classes. So if you had 2 athletes at the same weight classes, then that may have dropped your school out of being considered or in contention. And so being able to say, wow, we finally did this. But one of the things that really just made it even more emotional for me was that we got to do it as a sport as a whole. And I continue to go back to it because right now in our nation, there's a time of such division and there's a time of such consternation. And here was wrestling. At one point, it was men's wrestling versus Title IX, and then it was men's wrestling versus women's wrestling. And now it's wrestling. And now it's wrestling, and the men and the women are championing each other. When we have bouts and matches, we have both genders being represented. And to me, like, that is the shining thing of what wrestling is really displaying to our nation. Is this is the way that we can have civil discourse. This is the way for us to engage in in a sport that teaches leadership skills and grit, tenacity, resilience, and we get to bring that front and center, and we get to really showcase and be the example for the rest of the world about how we can disagree or be combatives on a wrestling mat and still walk out hand in hand or arm in arm because we are truly friends.
Yeah, wow, it's an amazing feeling when you know you're doing something good for other people, isn't it? Right? Coach Steiner, I mean, there's a story from when the CWA said we could move forward to the day when we had all three divisions. It took about a year, right? I mean, once we got that thumbs up from the Committee on Women's Athletics, we were able to achieve it within the year. But we have one Division I program in women's wrestling right now. We've been approved at Division I level, but we still have a lot of work to do. How important is getting into Division I with a full-scale women's program to the sport of wrestling? Because obviously that's the highest resource, most popular, most successful level of college athletics. And you wrestled and coached Division I. You know what it's like. How big a deal will that be for us to now get Division I lined up and behind our sport?
Well, I think it is for a few reasons. I mean, I think first and foremost, I mean, you have opportunities at major universities and major colleges, right? I mean, and that's the one thing that, even as we have been growing at the smaller schools, it's still held a lot of girls out of wrestling at the collegiate level just because they wanted a different college experience at a major university and with different academic standards and things like that. And so now hopefully we can get it going. So we have those full programs, right? Scholarship programs and everything like that at the major universities, the major conferences, right? I mean, that is a huge thing for us and for the academic part of it, right? To give opportunities for the female athletes out there, just like the men have at those major universities. But then I also think it definitely elevates the game for us because, at a lot of our major universities are our top coaches in the country, right? That have had world and Olympic success and NCAA success and things like that. So now to be able to put those athletes in a room with our top tier coaches, is a huge thing, right? And that's really going to help in our development and just being around those environments. I mean, we know what it's done, this past year at the University of Iowa, or past couple of years with the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, and when the girls have been involved there. I mean, it has had a huge development. I mean, we've had 3 world team members come out of that program and 1 junior world team member, right? I mean, so it shows that if you can get people in the right environments around the right people, development will happen, right? And so I think that's the other reason that, we need to keep pushing forward is, that is a huge step for us is the development piece and how quickly we develop within those college programs. So I think it's a huge step for us for both the academic side and the wrestling side of it.
So Sally, we want to be successful, right? Wrestlers are competitive. We always want to come out and do the absolute best we can in everything we do. What are we going to have to do to get Division I colleges and conferences to say yes to women's wrestling?
I think right now we are in a pandemic, and for all of the challenges that it brings, one of the silver linings for me is that there is the minimum mandate that every school has to have a minimum of 8 programs for men and women. And what we can say with absolute assuredness is that wrestling is a low-cost sport. If you already have a men's program, adding the women's accompaniment doesn't increase your budgetary expenditures as much as a school would think. And it also builds in proportionality. And I think to add on to what Terry was saying, the benefits that the athletes get from being able to have NCAA emerging sport status and bringing it to the Division I for me, there's a few things that are so critical. It opens up all of the scholarship opportunities. So that means that we're going to have more girls and women being able to go to college. But one of the things that really meant a lot to me, and which is why I really dug in so hard, was that if you look at the median family income of wrestlers, it's below $50,000 a year. And it's so hard for them to be able to pay for these private schools. I went to a private school and it was $60,000 a year. And the bulk of my student loans are from that. So to be able to get these schools that can offer in-state institution, that is going to be such a game changer for our athletes. But even more so when you start to break apart where the growth patterns are in the United States, and we recognize that the Hispanic, Latina, Latinx population is growing by 45%. And then you look at that demographic of athletes, and they often don't want to travel far away from home because their family unit is so differently structured than other families. Like, we need to be able to provide those opportunities. And so really, like, being able to articulate to these Division I programs, there is a low barrier to entry when it comes to cost. It's going to bring diversity and inclusion front and center because of the makeup of our athletes. And you're going to be building leaders. There was a landmark study by Ernst & Young. 96% of female C-suite executives have played a sport. And the more females that we can get into the sporting pipeline, the better. And one of the things that's so important for people to know is that the girls that we're getting to come out and wrestle for junior high, high school, and college programs, we're not taking them from another sport. They're girls that have never participated in other sports by and large. And so it's growing our population. It's growing the amount of athletes that we have. And those are going to be the athletes that are going to go to these institutions, and they're going to come out on the other side of it so much better prepared to be contributors to life, to be successful, and to stay involved with our program for wrestling through their entire lifespan.
And part of maybe getting this to be even more successful, and I'd actually like to hear from both of you on that, we need more women coaching women in wrestling, right? How do we develop that group of people that are going to be the Division I women's coaches in the future, or a college coach, or even a successful high school coach for women athletes who are women? How does that work, and how can we work together to make that a success as well?
Well, I really think that we have to put the future, leaders of our women's programs, which, hopefully there are a lot of women in there. I think we have to put them in a position to develop and learn, right? And hopefully we'll start to see more women involved with, even as assistant coaches or second assistant coaches within major universities, to learn what coaching is. It's not just showing technique, right? You're dealing with fundraising, you're dealing with administration, you're dealing with booster clubs, you're dealing with recruiting, you're dealing with all of that stuff. And that's a learned process. We need those CEO type skills. I think the worst thing that we can do is just shove someone into a Division I institution, make them a Division I coach, head coach, and not have those skills because they're going to be overran. So how do we do that? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of great mentors out there and great coaches that are out within our college program. So, I think the one thing is, I think the next question is, how are we going to put these programs into a university athletic department? Is it going to be one head coach and two assistant coaches, one in charge of women's wrestling, one in charge of men's wrestling, like a director of the operation as the ultimate head coach of both programs, and have two assistants? I mean, but I think something like that, so we can have that mentorship from those leading coaches out there that are helping both programs, with all the other parts of coaching. And I think that has to happen. I think the worst thing we can do is, put someone in a position to fail because we haven't taught them the right things. And I know, even like if I look back at my own development, right? I mean, I was an assistant coach at the Division I level for 8 years, right? First as a volunteer assistant, then as a second assistant, and but 8 years of development. And when I jumped into this position with USA Wrestling, I still had a lot to learn, right? I mean, because there was just differences with running the national program than it was running a college program. But I think that we have to put people in a position where they can develop. You don't see hardly any other sport. You know, look at like a college football. I mean, how coaches move through those programs before they become head coaches. You know, they start as basically the water boy, right? And then they're next they're working with film. Then next they're working with, you know, offensive line or something like that. And then they're working as an offensive coordinator. And then eventually they become, you know, a head coach. And I think we have to have some kind of a step process like that to bring coaches along and help them develop, right? And then I think, yeah, eventually over time, but again, think about it as a process, not because just because there's female athletes out there that we should just throw them into the position. Let's throw them into the position when they're ready to be in the position, right? And not beforehand, so we can have great success, right? With all of the programs that will be starting and are starting. Let's develop these athletes, make sure they're ready, make sure we're lending a helping hand to them and giving them the skills they need to succeed as a head coach. Then I'm all for having women as in charge of these programs.
I'm sure, Sally, you work a lot on helping develop coaches opportunities for women in wrestling. How do you see it? I mean, to get us to where, you know, our women see that as maybe that's something they want to do instead of going into medicine or law or private business or whatever.
I remember when we first started the NCAA bid, one of the first things I did was call the other emerging sports and say, okay, if you guys could do anything differently, what would you do? And they all said the same thing. None of us were prepared for women to take those coaching positions at the Division I level. So I started asking around saying, what do you think would be the best way to get female coaches prepared? And through all of that information, I distilled down there needs to be a program, and this is a sponsorship opportunity for anyone out there listening, where we get our athletes that are transitioning or the coaches that are in that coaching pool, and they need to go and get a mentorship with USA Wrestling under Terry Steiner and the national team women's staff, because they have to understand freestyle, because that's the style that we're wrestling at our collegiate system. Second, they need to mentor underneath a men's wrestling coach to learn the X's and O's and to understand what it is like to be that CEO at the collegiate level. And then the third thing that got presented was the women coaches need to get mentored by other female coaches within the NCAA that are not a part of our sport, so they can learn the politics, the bureaucracy, and how to handle themselves at each of those junctures. And so I think if we can come up with a pipeline that could be similar to that, where we get our potential coaches in, then we start to get them trained up and they get to get experience in all these different facets, that's going to be important, but that's only one piece of it. The other piece is that when we have female coaches who are qualified, who are prepared, when it is time for them to go and interview, we need to support the NCAA or the collegiate institutions in having diverse hiring pools. Because one of the things that we don't want, and this has happened with other sports, I don't foresee it happening with wrestling, and I hope it doesn't, but you would get coaches that weren't qualifying to become Division I men's coaches. They were going and holding those women's coaching positions, and then they were making it so that the women weren't able to grow and develop into those leadership positions. So being able to say, even if you hire a male coach, we want you to at least have a female coach as an assistant so that she can start to get that experience. Just like what Terry was saying, he spent time in all these different levels, and only after a certain point did he feel like he was truly prepared to go along. And to continue to echo what Terry said, we want to make sure that our candidates are prepared and qualified, and we want to put them in the position because they are the right fit. But we also need to recognize that we have to give them those tools to grow and to fit into it, and we have to be able to support them. So again, anyone out there that wants to sponsor this, we would love to have you on our team.
That's awesome. I'm going to wrap it up. You and I could talk, all three of us, for hours, so we're not going to do that. someone has to actually watch this. But uh, next step, 40 programs in the NCAA to get an official championship. We're in the high 30s already. That's probably going to happen if we do our jobs well, fairly short order, right? Could be a couple of years, and then it's called an official NCAA tournament. But is the goal to have an official Division I and official Division II and an official Division III for women's wrestling, just like the men? And what do we got to do to get there? I mean, there's a lot more work, isn't there, Sally?
There's a lot more work, but the great news is that by going through the state sanctioning effort and going through the emerging sports status effort, we have legitimately strengthened the grassroots pipeline. And so now there's places for girls to go on and wrestle, which is going to be one of the things that's going to be so crucial for these schools to add a women's varsity program. They want to make sure that there's athletes to fill those rostered slots. So we need 40 schools for Division I, 40 schools to Division II, 40 schools for Division III to have those separate breakout championships. And until then, it's going to go all underneath one umbrella. But the beautiful thing is that I think that no matter which way we look at it, there's nothing but wins and positives. It's under one umbrella. Great. We get to showcase Division I, II, and III to the world. And when the schools continue to add, because we know that they will, then as those divisions break off, we're going to be able to celebrate each of those milestones and markers along the way. And so one of the things that I didn't do as an athlete was celebrate those little victories. I would always think, well, I'm just going to train through that one. And where I'm at now in this space is I celebrate all of those little victories for as long as I can, because they've all been so fought and so hard earned.
So Terry, in your mind, how long will it be, and will we all be involved? When will you be able to present a first place trophy to an NCAA Division I women's wrestling champion? How quickly do you think we can get this fire burning?
I really don't think it's going to be that long, right? I mean, like you said, we're very close right now to having NCAA championships. I don't think it's so. We should be so much in a rush to separate the divisions, right? I mean, I think that, I would hope that we stay as one division for some time until we have, the numbers to really support different divisions, and just so we have a great pool and everyone's working together. I don't know. I'm sure there's limitations in there within each division, Division I, Division II, and Division III, and why they have to separate at some point. But I would hope that we would stay together as one pool for some time. But I'm hoping that we can, give out that NCAA trophy in short order, right? In the next couple of years, 2-3 years. I would hope that we could, have a first official NCAA championships. I mean, that's such a major step, right, for these athletes that are up and coming, these high school athletes right now. To have that kind of a opportunity in front of them is an exciting thing. I mean, being part of an NCAA institution, college, being a part of an NCAA championship team myself. I mean, those are memories that you will not forget, right? And it's a great thing. So I would hope that we could do that in short order.
Guys, I've really enjoyed our time together. I'm looking forward to continuing to make great announcements about growth and success and new opportunity. And I want to thank both Sally and Terry for all their leadership for so long in helping this come to the point we're at right now today. So thanks a lot. And, let's get together and chat again as we move forward, right?
Yes. And just briefly in closing, I want to be able to say if there's any NCAA or NAI institutions, junior colleges that want to add a women's program, now is the time, because we have so many athletes that are looking for opportunities, and they would be a perfect fit at your school.
The last
Absolutely.
one,
I mean, I think yesterday or the day before we came, now we're at 28 states, right, that are sanctioned.
28.
And that's I'll look back 2 years, right? 2-3 years ago, we were at 6 states. Now we're at 28. I mean, just unbelievable growth. The opportunities, are out there at the high school level. The numbers are there, so it is the right opportunity for college programs to start adding women's wrestling to their athletics departments.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll catch you guys later. Be well.